pre-war cities in Fallout. They've been burned down, but many of them have risen from the ashes as something new. That's what we're here to show you. We recently covered a bunch of them in this video that you can watch on the channel. This current video is where we finish up what's left. I want to reiterate that we're only covering the cities that have substantial lore backing them. We aren't going to cover cities that have been barely mentioned. So if you're waiting on a specific city and you don't see it in this video or the one before, then that's why. I'll be honest and say that I've tried to cover everything, but if something slipped through the cracks, I apologize. We'll be covering the post-war cities next, so if that sounds like something you're interested in, then consider subbing. Enjoy the vid, guys. Denver was a major urban center in Colorado, and in the Fallout universe, it was a city on the rise thanks to its mix of industry, trade, and strategic location in the Rocky Mountains. Most of its pre-war history matches the real world, but its role in Fallout's timeline leans heavily on its military importance. Denver sat at a crossroads of major interstate routes, making it a natural hub for transporting goods, troops, and equipment. It's hinted that it had both civilian and military infrastructure that could have made it valuable to the US government in the years before the Great War. When the Great War hit, Denver didn't escape the nuclear fire. The city was heavily bombed, causing massive destruction and leaving it largely uninhabitable. After the bombs, Denver became one of the most infamous ruins in the region, not just for its destruction, but for what moved in afterward. Denver is overrun with feral dogs, hundreds of them, turning the city into a massive snarling death maze. Packs of wild canines dominate the streets, attacking anything that moves, and their numbers are large enough that they're considered the city's real rulers. Navigating Denver in this state is dangerous, not because of human raiders or organized factions, but because every street corner could mean being surrounded by teeth and claws. The only people who lived there was a tribe called the Hangdogs. They managed to survive by learning to live alongside the dogs. They saw the animals as spirit companions, almost sacred, and built their way of life around them. That all changed when Caesar's legion reached Denver during their push across the southwest. Legate Lanius led the assault, and the Hangdogs actually lasted longer than most tribes who fought the legion. But in the end, Lanius broke their spirit in a brutal way. He ordered the legion to capture the tribe's dogs and burn them alive. For the Hangdogs, this wasn't just about losing their companions. They believed the dogs' spirits were damned to burn forever in the afterlife. With their faith shattered, the Hangdogs surrendered. From there, their culture was wiped out. The only thing the Legion kept was their talent for their dog handling. Many of the Hangdogs were turned into houndmasters, training war dogs for Caesar's army. Even so, the victory came at a heavy cost. Lanius lost a huge number of men fighting the dogs, trying to keep supply lines open, and struggling with the fact that Denver was basically a ghost city with no real human population to replenish his forces. Even under Legion control, Denver never really changed. The city is still crawling with feral dogs, and some of them are even cyber dogs left over from before the war. The Legion keeps pulling the best animals out to bolster their ranks, but Denver itself remains wild, less a functioning city and more a battlefield where the dogs never stop being in charge.
Atlantic City was a fun addition when it dropped for Fallout 76, and I like that they added in another real-world spot to the lore based on the glamour, grit, and corruption of this place. The Seaside Jewel was still a wild tourist hotspot prior to the war. The legendary boardwalk, glittering casino quarter, and attractions like the Aquarium of the Atlantic kept visitors pouring in, even during the tense years before the Great War. With legalized gambling and heavy automation, it became a place where Robco Protectrons handled everything from law enforcement to monorail driving. But behind the neon lights, politics were more smoke and mirrors than substance. Mayor Carly Day was content to let city staff run operations while she enjoyed the perks of office, completely underestimating how fragile her paradise really was. As the bombs fell, Atlantic City avoided a direct nuclear strike, but it couldn't escape catastrophe. The shockwaves triggered massive flooding that ripped through the streets, battering buildings with waves and even smashing ships into the coast. The water reached up to second-story windows in the downtown area, turning neighborhoods into drowned ruins. The more inland casino quarter survived, but Day was totally unprepared for crisis management. Her rationing efforts failed, and she eventually turned to the local mob for help, allowing them to effectively strong-arm farms for food. By 2078, starvation was settling in and her control slipped away. That's when Timothy Lane, a farmer who had purified his land and restarted agriculture, marched into the city, deposed her without resistance, and began rebuilding alongside his wife Frida. Post-war, Atlantic City's rebirth has been defined by its unholy alliance between three core powers: the Munis, which is Lane's civic government, the Lombardi crime family, and the Showman Entertainers. Lane's approach was blunt. make the city a civilized hell, where vice thrives but so does food, water, and electricity. The munis handle utilities and defense, the mob runs gambling and vice, and the showmen keep the crowds entertained. Everyone pays taxes, often reluctantly, to keep the lights on, and the balance is kept by a brutal equal dues agreement that gives each faction the right to take out anyone violating the deal. It's an uneasy peace that has kept Atlantic City one of the most prosperous places on the East Coast. Our influence on this place can tip the balance of this fragile arrangement. The city's recent troubles, rising overgrown threats, and simmering tension between the factions open doors for you to strengthen one group over another or help keep the triad together. Whether you want to play peacemaker, kingmaker, or just simply cause chaos, your actions can shift how Atlantic City survives in the post-war world. In a place built on bets and backroom deals, it's cool that we can define its future.
After the bombs, things get interesting for Rock Falls. It pops up as the main raider base in Fallout Tactics. Raiders from the region gather there to plot against the Brotherhood of Steel, and they've set up shop in ruined buildings, led by commanders like Bo Duffy, Luke Daniels, Daisy May, and Jesse Gomer. Our mission this time is to clear them out and rescue a scientist named Daisun, or Nanook, and then grab a weird robot hen that they've been messing with. Once the Brotherhood wrecks the camp, Rock Falls falls silent. Raiders are gone, the place is deserted, and your team even finds a massive gasoline depot nearby. Payoff for one heck of a cleanup job. Scott City turns into something wild. In Tactics, Scott City is home to a massive industrial complex that's been taken over by the Calculator's robots. They've turned it into a prison and a research hub, jamming towers, captive humans lobotomized and experimented on, and the bodies of victims all piled up. The Brotherhood of Steel sends in a squad to rescue a captured merchant, then destroy those towers and put a stop to the robot terror. Once it's cleaned out, Scott City ends up empty again. A ruined robot stronghold that the Brotherhood has reclaimed. There's no finer details beyond that, but it's a pretty cool sight. St. Louis appears in Fallout Tactics as the site of another Brotherhood of Steel mission. By the late 22nd century, the city is under heavy assault from super mutants, and an earlier Brotherhood squad, Fang Squad, was wiped out there. The Warriors sent in to evacuate survivors and recover important assets, including General Barnaky if he's still alive. The mission is dangerous and costly, and by the end, the Brotherhood is cleared out of the city, leaving it as a contested territory in the Mutant War.
Codsworth, I can't believe you're still here.
Well, of course I'm still here. Surely you don't think a little radiation could deter the pride of General Atomics International? But you seem the worse for wear. Best not let the wife see you in that state, Where is the missus, by the way?
I love this place. It's so nostalgic. Sanctuary Hills was a quiet suburb outside Concord, Massachusetts. It was the kind of place built for people chasing the American dream in the Fallout timeline. White picket fences, clean streets, and the hum of Mr. Handy robots trimming hedges. Families lived in modern pre-war homes with all the bells and whistles from General Atomics and Robco. Vault-Tec had a major presence here too. Many residents were registered for Vault 111, which sat just up the hill. Life in Sanctuary Hills revolved around middle-class comfort, with its residents benefiting from the technology boom and corporate-driven conveniences that defined the pre-war US. When the Great War began on October 23rd, Sanctuary Hills was hit with little warning. The residents received alerts to head to Vault 111 almost immediately after the sirens began. Within literal minutes, nuclear detonations devastated the surrounding region. Sanctuary Hills itself didn't take a direct hit from a bomb landing in the neighborhood, but the shockwaves and fallout from nearby strikes swept through. The world outside was incinerated, and those who made it into Vault 111 were sealed away in cryogenic stasis, while anyone left behind was burned, irradiated, or killed by the chaos. After the bombs, Sanctuary Hills was left abandoned for almost 2 whole centuries. The houses fell apart, roads cracked, and nature started to reclaim the land. Without upkeep, the pristine lawns turned into overgrown weeds and the clean streets became littered with debris. Wildlife moved in, radroaches, bloatflies, and even the occasional mole rat. By 2287, the neighborhood was little more than a ruin, still recognizable by its layout but stripped of the life it once had. The cryogenically frozen survivors in Vault 111 slept through the decades of decay, completely unaware of the wasteland their home had become. When the sole survivor finally emerged, Sanctuary Hills became a potential settlement site. It could be rebuilt, fortified, and populated again, but the scars of 2077 were everywhere. Crumbling houses, rusted mailboxes, and the skeletal remains of those who never made it to safety. Even in its restored state, the place is haunted from the morning when everything changed. Revere Beach Boardwalk was once a spot where families once came for summer fun. Ice cream parlors, arcades, that kind of lighthearted stuff. The vibes were likely immaculate, being a boardwalk town that might have been lively before everything went sideways. When the bombs fell, there's no detailed fallout lore about what happened to Revere right on that day. But the world building in the Commonwealth tells us it likely took a hit from the strikes on Boston and suffered major decay. By the time of Fallout 4, those old boardwalk buildings are wrecked, ghostly structures of what used to be. After the bombs, Revere is a raider playground. The beach district in Fallout 4 is run by a gang led by a raider named Cinder. They set up shop at Revere Beach Station and even took over the boardwalk's arcade, ice cream shop, and other buildings. Raiders patrol the place, raiding lofts, using old arcades for shack, and making that once happy place more dangerous than ever. Aside from that, it's one of the more touristy type of spots in the game, even if visitors aren't too welcome.
The Pit is what's left of Pittsburg, Pennsylvania after the Great War. Before the bombs, the city was a powerhouse of industry, producing steel, weapons, robots, and even vertibirds and power armor. That made it an obvious target, and when the nukes hit, the mix of radiation and decades of industrial pollution turned the entire area into a toxic wasteland. The rivers became poisoned and the air was dangerous to breathe, and over time, the people who lived there began to mutate. In the years that followed, raider gangs took over. They used slaves to rebuild the ruins into a settlement they simply called the Pit. By 2103, it was firmly a raider stronghold, with enforcers keeping slaves in line while the city grew around the Ohio River. Some locals, led by a man named Page, managed to escape the chaos and eventually founded Foundation in Appalachia. But for most, life in the Pit meant violence and oppression. By the time of Fallout 76, the city was locked in a brutal struggle between two factions. The Union, which was a group of workers trying to bring order and stability, and the Fanatics, a savage raider gang bent on total control. Even the Hellcat Company briefly worked with the Fanatics, but the fighting never truly stopped, which is what draws Vault 76 dwellers into the conflict during the expeditions. Life in the Pit wasn't just dangerous because of raiders. The poisoned rivers left generations of people with mutations and genetic diseases. Some developed growths or extra limbs, while others fell victim to neurological conditions. These conditions stripped them of reason and left them violent, feral, and barely human. The worst of these conditions was the troglodyte degeneration contagion, or TDC. Those infected became twisted, hunchback creatures known as trogs, and newborns were especially vulnerable. Over time, packs of trogs roamed the city, making survival even harder. Then came the Scourge. In 2255, Owen Lyons of the Brotherhood of Steel launched a devastating attack on the Pit. In a single night, they killed half of the city's population, sparing only those who surrendered. They left with a group of healthy children and rumors of stolen tech, but they also left behind a city gutted of leadership and on the edge of collapse. That vacuum was eventually filled by someone unexpected, Initiate Ishmael Asher, a Brotherhood soldier thought to have died during the Scourge. Asher survived, badly injured, but came back to rule the Pit. With his knowledge of the steel industry and his advantage of power armor, he pulled the city back together. Under his rule, the Pit's steel mills roared back to life, powered by slave labor and enforced by a growing raider army. Asher presented himself as a leader with vision, making promises of freedom and a brighter future, though that future was built on blood and chains. To keep the slaves in line, he even offered a chance at freedom through brutal gladiator fights in the arena known as the Hole. Asher claimed his methods were temporary, and that his true goal was to cure the city's sickness. That hope became real when his wife Sandra gave birth to their daughter, Marie. Unlike other children of the Pit, she showed no signs of TDC. In fact, she appeared immune. Asher saw her as the city's salvation, and tasked Sandra with finding a cure using their daughter's unique immunity. But not everyone believed in Asher's vision. One of his lieutenants, Werner, turned against him. After failing to overthrow Asher, Werner was enslaved, collared, and humiliated. He eventually escaped and reached out for outside help, drawing in the Lone Wanderer. With the Wanderer's arrival, we had to face a choice. Side with Asher and his vision for the city's future, or back Werner's rebellion, which risked throwing the Pit into even more chaos. In the end, the future of the Pit depends on that choice. If Asher remains in power, the city continues its system of slavery, but it holds on to the hope of a cure through Marie. If Werner succeeds, the raiders fall, but the city collapses into disorder as trogs overrun entire districts. Either way, the Pit is one of the most dangerous places in the Fallout world, a city defined in its endless struggle for survival. Before the bombs, Necropolis was simply Bakersfield, California. A fairly normal city on the surface, but home to one of Vault-Tec's experiments. Beneath the city sat Vault 12, which had a critical flaw built into its design. The vault door was intentionally manufactured so that it would never fully seal, allowing radiation to flood in after the Great War. This wasn't an accident or a last-minute mistake. It was part of Vault-Tec's research into the effects of long-term radiation exposure on humans. Residents entered the vault thinking they'd be safe from nuclear fallout, but their fate was already sealed before the sirens even started. When the bombs did fall, Bakersfield was hit directly. The blast destroyed large sections of the city and radioactive dust blanketed everything. Inside Vault 12, the door's design flaw allowed massive doses of fallout to leak in almost immediately. People inside had nowhere to run and no way to fix the problem. The radiation didn't kill them all at once, but it began to change their bodies from the inside out. Any hope of returning to a normal life vanished within days. In the years that followed, Vault 12's residents began to mutate into ghouls. At first, many retained their human intelligence and memories, but their appearance had changed to the pale, shriveled skin and hairless faces that would become a hallmark of ghoulification. Over the decades, more and more of them lost their sanity and turned feral, their minds rotting away while their bodies stubbornly refused to die. Eventually, these ghouls left the vault and claimed the ruins of Bakersfield, creating the settlement that would later be known as Necropolis. By the time of Fallout 1, Necropolis was a city of the dead in every sense of the word. The ghouls lived among the remains of buildings, often staying underground in the old vault or hiding from outsiders. They relied on a single working water pump to survive, and control of this pump became the center of local politics. Above ground, feral ghouls wandered the streets, attacking anything that moved. The few non-feral leaders, like Set, tried to keep some form of order, but Necropolis was a dangerous, crumbling place.
Scollay Square was simply part of Old Boston in its former glory. It doesn't have any Fallout-specific quirks, so don't expect to find vaults or some type of secret project, or even a mutated fish lab. It was just urban space in pre-war Boston, nothing too special in the in-game universe. When the bombs dropped, there's no story about Scollay Square being destroyed or hit. Fallout doesn't tell us what happened to it during the Great War, so we don't know too many details about this place when America was in the process of its apocalyptic revival. Its fate in that moment remains a mystery. After the bombs, the place re-emerges, but under a new name, Good Neighbor. Built in the ruins of old Scollay Square, this rough and tumble settlement shows up in 2287 as a haven for drifters, ghouls, criminals, and people who don't belong anywhere else. Mayor John Hancock runs it with a loose, for everyone type of vibe, but it's still a dangerous spot, full of shady deals and strange alliances. But Good Neighbor will always have a special place in our hearts since we get to meet up with the Vault-Tec rep and our favorite Magnolia. Quincy, Massachusetts was a working-class city south of Boston before shit hit the fan. In the Fallout universe, it kept much of its real-world identity, a dense urban area with historic neighborhoods and a strong manufacturing presence. It was also close enough to Boston to feel the influence of the city's politics, trade, and military activity. While there's no sign Quincy was tied directly to Vault-Tec experiments or major defense projects, its location made it strategically valuable. It sat along key roadways leading into the heart of the Commonwealth, which meant in peacetime it benefited from commerce, but in wartime it would be in harm's way. When the Great War broke out on October 23rd, Quincy was devastated. The bombs that hit Boston sent destructive shockwaves through the surrounding area, and Quincy's proximity meant it suffered from both structural damage and heavy fallout. Fire swept through the city, and the surviving population was cut off from outside aid almost immediately. Whatever civil defense measures were in place weren't enough to keep order. The infrastructure collapsed, and most survivors either fled or died in the days and weeks after the detonations. After the bombs, Quincy's ruins stood largely empty for decades. By the late 2100s, scavengers and settlers began reclaiming parts of the city, seeing its location as a good defensive position. By the 2280s, the Minutemen had taken control of Quincy, turning it into a fortified settlement. It became one of their strongholds until disaster struck in 2287. The Gunners, a well-armed mercenary group, launched a coordinated attack, overrunning the Minutemen defenders and killing many of them. The survivors, including Preston Garvey, were forced to retreat, marking one of the faction's biggest defeats. By the time the sole survivor arrives in Fallout 4, Quincy is firmly under Gunner control. The city is a war zone, littered with the bodies of fallen Minutemen and crawling with mercenaries armed to the teeth. For anyone passing through the Southern Commonwealth, Quincy isn't a friendly stop, because even the best defended settlements can fail if the wrong enemy comes knocking. Bunker Hill in Charlestown, Boston was a historic and iconic district known for the Bunker Hill Monument and its Revolutionary War significance. In the Fallout timeline, it still served mainly as a tourist site and residential neighborhood, with old brick buildings, narrow streets, and local businesses. There's no evidence it was home to any pre-war Vault-Tec facilities or major high-tech industry, but its location placed it in the greater Boston metropolitan area, close enough to be affected by any nuclear strike on the city. When the Great War began on October 23, 2077, Boston was struck by nuclear weapons, and the surrounding neighborhood suffered from the blast, shockwave, and fallout. Bunker Hill wasn't a direct target, but the destruction of Boston's infrastructure and fires from the blast zone spread damage throughout Charlestown. Buildings were gutted, streets became impassable, and radiation settled in. Many residents likely died in the initial chaos or from the fallout that followed. After the war, the area around the monument was abandoned for generations before being resettled. By 2287, Bunker Hill has been rebuilt into a fortified caravan trading post, surrounded by high metal walls and guarded gates. Its position between the inner city and the Northern Commonwealth made it a central hub for trade routes. The settlement was run by Kessler, who maintained order and collected tariffs from visiting caravans. Despite its defenses, it became a battleground during a high-profile confrontation between the Railroad, Brotherhood of Steel, Institute, and Minutemen over escaped since. Even 2 centuries after the bombs, Bunker Hill survived as a place of commerce and conflict, still defined by the tall monument that managed to outlast the city's fall. The obelisk tells of America's old wars and is a silent witness to its final one, or at least the final one for now.
Before the war, Los Angeles was one of the most populated and influential cities in the United States, and in the Fallout universe, it was also home to some major pre-war developments tied directly to its setting's history. The city contained Vault 13's location nearby, and the surrounding region was heavily involved in the defense industry, corporate expansion, and resource trade during the resource wars. It was a center of culture and economics, a lot like it is in our real world. But in Fallout's timeline, it also played a part in the increasing tensions that pushed the country toward an all-out war. Los Angeles was also on the radar for military installations and critical infrastructure, making it a high-priority target if nuclear war broke out. When the bombs fell, Los Angeles was hit hard. The strikes destroyed most of the urban area, killing millions instantly and flattening much of the skyline. Fires raged for days, and fallout storms poisoned what little was left standing. The city's coastal location didn't spare it. If anything, it worsened the devastation, with shockwaves ripping through the harbors and flooding certain areas. The destruction was so bad that the original city ceased to exist in any functional sense, reduced to a sprawl of craters and rubble. In the decades that followed, survivors moved into the ruins and began to build again, using scavenged materials and whatever shelter they could find. Over time, these settlements merged into what would be called the Boneyard, a name that came from the skeletal remains of the skyscrapers and the countless dead still buried under the debris. It was a lawless place for most of its history, with gangs and raiders controlling large parts of the ruins. By 2161, the Boneyard had developed into several distinct factions. The largest was Aditum, a walled-off community run by the followers of the Apocalypse, who had set up shop in the old Los Angeles Public Library to preserve knowledge and help survivors. There were also the Blades, a gang that eventually became allies to the followers, and the Regulators, who acted as kind of a police force but were far from noble. Outside the safety of walled communities, the streets were dangerous, crawling with raiders and worse. The Boneyard remained a place of opportunity and danger, where scavengers could strike at rich or end up dead in a matter of minutes. Where Los Angeles once represented progress and growth, the Boneyard became a reminder of how quickly it can all be turned to dust. Before the war, Redding was a mining town in Northern California. In the Fallout universe, its main claim to fame was its gold mining industry, which was still operating right up until the bombs fell. In Fallout's alternate history, the town's wealth also attracted the attention of larger powers. The mining corporations and prospectors working there were tied into pre-war trade routes, moving ore and refined gold south to other parts of California. While Redding never became a major urban center, its mines kept it relevant in the pre-war economy. When the bombs fell, Redding was far enough away from any major military target to avoid a direct nuclear strike, but that didn't spare them from the fallout. After the war, Redding eventually became known for something other than gold. It became a key stop along the trade routes between the New California Republic, Vault City, and New Reno. The gold mines still operated, but now they were controlled by whoever had the muscle to hold them. By 2241, 3 major factions were wrestling for control of Redding: the NCR, Vault City, and New Reno. Each wanted the gold and the strategic position that the town offered. Reading's miners were caught in the middle, mostly forced into deals or outright coercion to just survive. The constant tug of war over the town left it politically unstable, but it also gave it value. Merchants, caravans, and mercenaries passed through regularly, making it one of the more active towns in Northern California's post-war economy. Even in the dangerous wasteland, Reading's gold still managed to shine, but now it's fought over with bullets instead of contracts. San Francisco in the Fallout universe was a major hub for both military and industrial power on the West Coast. The city had a strong naval presence, with military docks and advanced research projects tied to the Pacific conflict between the United States and China. It was also a tech-heavy city, with robotics and shipbuilding industries feeding into the war effort. The Chinatown district remained culturally rich, but even there, the war loomed large, with citizens contributing to resource drives and rationing programs. San Francisco's mix of military infrastructure and strategic location made it an important place of America's Pacific defense. When the bombs fell, San Francisco suffered catastrophic damage. Parts of the city were destroyed outright by nuclear detonations, while others were leveled by the resulting fires and earthquakes triggered along the San Andreas Fault. Fallout blanketed the area, and the surviving population was left to deal with the radiation sickness, destroyed infrastructure, and the collapse of supply lines. After the bombs, the city was rebuilt by survivors of a Chinese submarine, the Qunicy, which had been damaged during the bombings and drifted into the bay. Stranded, its crew broke down their own sub for parts and built a fortress in the remains of Chinatown. Over the generations, their descendants became the Xi, a powerful and secretive group dedicated to science and technological progress. They ruled from the Steel Palace, guarded by high-end weapons and an ancient computer mainframe they called the Emperor. Under the Xi, San Francisco became a hub of research and invention, all while staying separate from politics of the wider wasteland. But the Xi weren't the only power in town. San Francisco was also home to the Hubologists, a cult that believed humanity was plagued by spirits called neurodynes, and that cleansing rituals could unlock hidden potential. Their ultimate goal was to escape Earth entirely. They had their hands on a space shuttle, the ESS Quetzal, and dreamed of launching it into orbit using the ruined Golden Gate Bridge as a platform. For them, San Francisco was less about rebuilding and more about leaving the planet behind. Caught between these two extremes were the city's other residents, drifters, merchants, mercenaries, and a group known as the Tanker Vagrants. They lived aboard the PMV Valdez, a massive pre-war Poseidon energy tanker rusting in the bay. The Valdez eventually became key to Fallout 2's main story, when the Chosen One repaired the ship and used it to reach the Enclave's oil rig, setting up the final confrontation that destroyed President Richardson and his organization for good. By the end of those events, San Francisco changed once again. The Hubologists were wiped out, leaving the Xi as the city's dominant power. The Xi and the Tanker Vagrants struck a deal, combining science with trade to turn the city into a thriving hub of fishing and commerce. All the while, they kept the growing New California Republic at arm's length, preferring their independence to NCR control. Even with its new prosperity, San Francisco never lost its edge. Its streets were still dangerous, its politics still strange, and newcomers stuck out like a sore thumb. Between the Xi's secrecy, the Brotherhood of Steel's presence, and the city being between Navarro and the ruins of Mariposa, San Francisco remains one of the wasteland's most advanced, but also one of its most unpredictable cities.
Far Harbor was one of my favorite DLCs to get in my lifetime. Maybe that sounds crazy to some, but the location was cool, exploring Vim lore was fun, and there's even a bit of Stephen King references mentioned. It looks like a cool spot, and I'm actually planning on visiting this location in October, so I'm personally pumped, but enough about me. It's one that takes a clear nod to the real-world seaside resort town of the same name in Maine. Before what made Far Harbor so dark, this northeast corner of Mount Desert Island was a thriving coastal getaway. Its economy built on tourism, fishing, and maritime trade along the Atlantic. Pre-war Bar Harbor was the kind of place where vacationers strolled along the piers and shipping routes brought in goods from all over the eastern seaboard. But when the Great War came in 2077, all of that changed in an instant. The shockwaves in Fallout didn't just level cities on the mainland, the island was hit by the long-term curse of the fog. This wasn't the typical seaside mist you get in the likes of San Francisco, this was a dense radioactive wall of death that could roll in and erase a settlement in weeks. Entire coastal communities on the island vanished under it, leaving Bar Harbor, now renamed Far Harbor, as one of the last scraps of civilization still clinging to the shore. In the years that followed, survival here meant a brutal balancing act. The town's salvation came from two sources: the mariner who let the last of the island's survivors shelter on her pier, and the synth leader whose fog condensers carved out a small safe zone. By 2287, Far Harbor wasn't just fighting the fog, it was on the brink of an open war with the Children of Adam. This cult believed the fog was holy and that Far Harbor's resistance to it was blasphemy. Harsh words turned to bloodshed, and now both sides view each other as obstacles to their survival, or their destiny. Inside the walls, life remains stubbornly traditional. The harbormen live off fishing, hunting, and trade, led by a captain in honor of their seafaring roots. The captain, who's the current leader, is more open-minded than most, but even she struggles to temper the town's deep mistrust of outsiders. As the sole survivor, your influence here can tip the scales dramatically. You can broker peace between Far Harbor, the Children of Adam, and Acadia, or you can wipe the harbormen off the map entirely by sabotaging their power. Shut down their wind farm during cleansing the land, and the fog will sweep in, bringing anglers, gulpers, and fog crawlers to finish the job. Far Harbor will fall, becoming the Far Harbor ruins, and its surviving citizens will greet you with retribution. It's cool that you can make such a large impact on an entire town like this, and you ultimately make your own canon. So my personal take is that Bar Harbor's transformation into Far Harbor is one of Fallout 4's most atmospheric stories, where the enemy isn't just the creatures at the gates, but the sea itself. Lexington, in the Commonwealth of Fallout, was once a historic Massachusetts town best known for its pivotal role in the American Revolutionary War. By 2077, it had traded its colonial legacy for industrial grit, earning the name Corvega Town, thanks to the massive Corvega assembly plant dominating its southern half. An elevated highway overpass sliced the town in two, with many older buildings retrofitted to support the new infrastructure. When the bombs fell, Lexington's industry and infrastructure collapsed into ruin, and over time the town became a raider stronghold, until the overwhelming presence of feral ghouls forced most gangs out. By 2287, a new raider crew led by Jared had returned, determined to wipe out the ghouls and reclaim the Corvega plant as their base of operations. The southern half of Lexington is centered on the towering Corvega assembly plant, now fortified by Jared's gang, while the northern half contains the town center, known as the Battle Green, where a Minuteman statue stands as a memory of the past. The overpass itself has become a makeshift settlement with shelters packed with chems, a locked safe, and hostile raiders. Despite its war-torn, irradiated decay, Lexington's design and layout are based on the real-world town of Lexington, Massachusetts, just under 11 miles northwest of Boston, where the opening battle of the American Revolutionary War forever cemented its place in U.S. history. The next spot on our list takes us far from the Mojave's neon glow and deep into the Midwest, to a place the old world once called the Gem City, Quincy, Illinois. In the Fallout Tactics era, Quincy is a scarred remnant of its pre-war self, home to both humans and ghouls, split cleanly down the tracks that run through the heart of town. On the western side lies Shantytown, the Ghoul Quarter, where abandoned rail facilities have been turned into homes. It's a fragile piece, and not everyone is happy to share the same streets. By 2197, Quincy found itself under a very different kind of threat: the Beast Lords, a band of tribals with the terrifying ability to command wasteland creatures, began raiding the town. Their attacks weren't just basic raider lootings, they brought Deathclaws and other monsters into the fight, hence the name Beast Lords. Honestly, it's kind of a shit name. Led by Duff the Beastmaster and another commander, they seized parts of Quincy and took hostages, including Mayor Hillary Eastwood. Desperate, the people of Quincy called the Brotherhood of Steel for protection. The Brotherhood, of course, answered, sending a squad to break the Beast Lord's hold and free the mayor. And while the Brotherhood succeeded, Quincy's troubles didn't end there. In an almost Shakespearean twist, betrayal came not from outside, but from within. A group of local criminals poisoned the Brotherhood paladins standing guard over the town, looted their gear, including precious suits of power armor, and hijacked a Brotherhood vehicle to escape. Their destination was Coldwater, where they promptly took control. The response was a bit rough. The Brotherhood hunted them down, killing the rogues and stringing their bodies up alongside the very paladins they had slain, a display meant to show everyone of the cost of treachery. Friends and family of the criminals were rounded up and sent to an internment camp. The message was crystal clear though: the Brotherhood had long memories. Quincy's survival has always hinged on who it chooses to side with. If the Brotherhood's efforts against the Beast Lords falter, whispers start to spread about finding allies elsewhere, namely the Marx Brothers, whose reputation is no less dangerous. In a town where ghouls run the brothel and a lone super mutant works among them, the lines between friend, foe, and necessary evil are quite thin. Today, Quincy is one of the Midwest's most complex stories, a place where post-war survival has meant trading one kind of danger for another, where even your protectors can become your next threat.
Chicago was already one of the largest and most important cities in the United States, and in the Fallout universe, that meant it had serious military and political weight. The city served as a strategic hub for the pre-war US government, and it was tied closely to the Enclave's operations. While details are scarce, the presence of the Chicago Enclave outpost tells us that before the Great War, this location might have acted as a regional command center or a logistical hub for the organization. The Enclave's deep roots in pre-war military and political structures mean Chicago likely hosted classified research, military planning, and possibly storage for advanced technology. Its central location in the country made it perfect for moving resources quickly east or west. When the bombs fell, Chicago took heavy damage. Major population centers like it were obvious targets, both for their military assets and their industrial capacity. The Enclave outpost, if it survived the initial detonations, would have gone dark, along with most other pre-war government installations, locking down or retreating underground to ride out the nuclear exchange. In the years after the Great War, Chicago became a shadow of its pre-war self. Most of the city was reduced to rubble, with radiation and collapsed skyscrapers cutting off entire sections. The Enclave presence persisted in some form, as we know from Fallout Tactics, but a lot of their activity there remains unknown. Whether they stayed to hold the city or simply used it as a base for further operations in the Midwest is left deliberately vague in the canon. By the time of the events in the Midwest during Fallout Tactics, the Enclave Chicago base is mentioned as being involved in the larger Enclave network, but it's pretty clear they aren't operating at full strength. Eddie was originally sent on a journey from the East Coast to Navarro with a stop in Chicago. At one point, he broke down near the city, where a boy named Tommy and his family found him. They managed to repair him in their garage, but Eddie's programming forced him to continue on his mission. Chicago also became tied to the Brotherhood of Steel. During their campaigns against super mutants in the Midwest, they sent a fleet of Zeppelins eastward. Most of their airships were destroyed, but one crashed near Chicago. The survivors established a new Brotherhood chapter in the ruins, but over time they cut contact with the main organization and went rogue. Their fate is still uncertain, but it left the Midwest Brotherhood as one of the more mysterious offshoots in Fallout history. Later in 2254, the Brotherhood launched another expedition east with Washington, D.C. as their main goal. A secondary objective was to re-establish contact with the Chicago chapter, but that mission failed, leaving the chapter's status still unresolved. Chicago stands in Fallout's lore as one of those cities we know is important but remains secret, with more questions than answers about what really happened there after the world ended. Maybe we get a future mainline game in this location.
Las Vegas was one of the few major cities in the US that didn't just survive, it thrived. Fallout's version of Vegas had already seen Robert House, a brilliant and reclusive businessman, quietly seize control of the city through his company, Robco Industries. House predicted the coming nuclear conflict decades in advance and poured his wealth into preparing for it. He purchased the rights to most of the strip, upgraded the city's infrastructure, and installed a massive defense network capable of detecting and intercepting incoming warheads. Underneath the neon lights, Vegas was being turned into a fortified sanctuary, with Securitron robots and a self-sustaining economy ready to keep the city alive even if the rest of the world fell apart. When the bombs fell on October 23rd, House's defensive systems kicked in. Using his network of launch interceptors, he destroyed or diverted all but one of the 77 nuclear warheads targeted at the Mojave. That single warhead detonated far enough away to cause only minimal damage to the city itself. While most of America's landmarks were reduced to rubble, the Vegas Strip's casinos, hotels, and main infrastructure stayed intact. The surrounding desert and some outlying neighborhoods were hit by radiation and debris, but the heart of the city remained standing. House himself was kept alive in a life support system beneath the Lucky 38 casino, able to oversee the city indefinitely. After the war, the Mojave became a wasteland like everywhere else, but Vegas was different. It had a functioning core untouched by nuclear fire. For over 200 years, House remained in control, waiting for the right time to reawaken the Strip. That moment came when the NCR expanded eastward and the city became a key point of interest. House revived the casinos with the help of three major families: the Chairman, the Omertas, and the White Glove Society, each given control of their own resort in exchange for loyalty to him. This created the New Vegas Strip, a mix of pre-war luxury and post-war politics fueled by caps, gambling, and the lure of safety. Outside the Strip's walls, the story was much harsher. Freeside, North Vegas, and the surrounding Mojave settlements lived without House's protection, dealing with raiders, chem dealers, and gang violence. The Hoover Dam, located nearby, became the most important source of power and water in the region, sparking the Mojave's major conflict between the NCR, Caesar's Legion, and House himself. Despite the dangers, New Vegas stood as the rare example of a pre-war city that had dodged the apocalypse's worst punch, keeping its lights on while the rest of the country went dark. Before the bombs fell, Reno was already known as the biggest little city in the world, famous for its casinos, nightlife, and anything-goes attitude. In the Fallout timeline, this reputation was even more exaggerated. It was a city built on gambling, liquor, organized crime, and quick marriages, or divorces depending on the day. Tourists came in for the bright lights and entertainment, while local families with mob ties ran the city from behind the scenes. The pre-war Reno economy leaned heavily on vice industries, and the city thrived off people looking to lose their money and forget their problems for a while. When the Great War hit, Reno avoided a direct nuclear strike, likely because it wasn't considered a high-priority military target. Even so, the shockwaves and fallout still reached it, cutting it off from the outside resources and wiping away its tourist-driven economy overnight. The casinos and hotels were left abandoned or run by desperate survivors who stripped them for supplies. The organized crime families that had once ruled the city quickly shifted from running gambling rackets to controlling food, water, and weapons. Violence became a daily fact of life, and whatever pretense of law the city had before was gone for good. In the centuries after the war, Reno transformed into New Reno, a city that kept its old vices and cranked them up to 11. By 2241, it was a hub for drugs, gambling, prostitution, and mercenary work, with each of the city's 4 major crime families fighting for dominance. The Wrights, Bishops, Mordinos, and Salvatores each controlled parts of the city, running their operations from fortified casinos and using hired guns to keep everyone else in line. The surrounding wasteland saw New Reno as a place where fortunes could be made fast, or lives could be lost faster. Despite its cutthroat nature, New Reno became a central player in post-war politics and trade. Its chem production, particularly jet, gave it influence far beyond its borders, while its location on major trade routes made it impossible for neighboring powers to ignore. It was a city that had survived the end of the world without losing its identity. It just traded neon lights and tourism for neon lights and blood money. In the wasteland, that counted as consistency. Up until this point, if you watched our first Fallout City video, we've covered every pre-war city that we have a post-war outcome for. And you may recall that we did every state and every country in the Fallout universe, which means we plan on dropping a compilation of every geographical location later next month. So make sure you sub for that if you'd like. Thank you guys for watching and commenting, we really do appreciate it. And remember, enjoyed time is never wasted time, and we'll see you in the next.